Hey guys, so I've had my truck for a few months now and I've taken care of a few minor issues. In this video I'll show you how I replaced the turn signal switch, replaced the little vent window, and shortened the battery cable. Okay, so here you can see the turn signal is working fine, but if you just move the steering wheel a little bit, you can see it stops, and that's kind of annoying. So we're going to go ahead and change the switch out. Down below, this is the turn signal switch connector, and we'll just disconnect that and we'll be good to go. So this horn button just pries loose. We'll just grab under there and next, we're going to take off the 3/4 inch nut that's holding the steering wheel onto the column, followed by the washer. Next, the 3 screws, and remove the cup and the plate behind it. And now we'll need a steering wheel puller. And it looks like we got the right size bolt for the steering wheel puller. Steering wheel puller in place. We'll just use a wrench and hopefully be able to pull it out. Okay, with the steering wheel off, the switch is exposed. We'll have to remove the turn signal lever and actually the column shroud to get the wiring down to where it needs to be. All right, I'll just use a hex head driver to remove the lever. Couple more Phillips screws. We're getting there. We got 2 more hex screws on the bottom. There we go. Got all the little pieces out. All I got to do is replace the switch and start putting it back together. So placement of the black wire, which goes to the horn, is important. It kind of looks like this groove right here might be suitable, but it's not. That's where the metal tab on the canister that holds the switch in place goes. The wire needs to be routed in this groove right next to the opening. So now you can see the wire properly placed in that groove. What happens if it's on the outside, as you tighten down on the switch, the metal tab will push down on the wire, break through the insulation, and ground the horn, so that the horn will continue to sound without the benefit of having to push a button. Not good. You can ask me how I found this out. The answer is obvious. Okay, so the new switch is in place. The wires are routed through the column shroud and just hanging loose right now, but we'll connect them up once we get going. So we changed the switch, brand new. Guess what? Turn the steering wheel a little bit, the light on the dash goes out. With the light on the dash on or off doesn't matter. The rear signal is working, but the turn signal up front, no action. So now with the steering wheel off again, you can see that it's 0. But if I just move it a little bit down, again, no conductance. That's the same motion as moving the steering wheel a little bit. Just hold it up a little bit and got good contact. Just turn it down a little bit, still in position, but just a little bit off, it goes off. So looks like we got a switch problem, even though there's a brand new switch. So in the end, turned out that the new switch had the same problem as the old switch. A little bit of drag on the steering wheel would cancel the right-hand signal only. After fooling around a little bit, took the switch apart. This is the old one, but did the same thing on a new one. And you can see these little spring bars make the contact and break the contact. And they were just a little bit out of line. Took them out and bent them a little bit with pliers. And lo and behold, success. Okay, so here we are. Turn the right blinker on. You can see it's working properly. And we move the steering wheel back and forth, and it stays on. And you can see the front is working the way it's supposed to. Okay, as long as we're talking about electrical stuff, let's do the battery cable next. Unfortunately, there's some misinformation on the internet that you need to avoid. One site talked about just putting solder in the lug and melting it and then jamming a wire in. That is the exact perfect way to get a cold solder joint, which you don't want. So one of the things I did was shorten the battery cable. When it got the truck, it had a new battery cable that was too long, and actually there was danger of it getting caught in the suspension. Here you can see I've used clips to attach the cable to the fender wall, and nice long run over to the starter motor with just enough slack to take up movement of the suspension, but not so much that the cable could get caught in the springs or find trouble elsewhere. All right, so one, we're not going to want to rely on the solder to provide the mechanical strength. So even though we're going to solder, we're going to want to crimp to provide the mechanical strength. We're going to use a copper lug and the appropriate size for the wire that we want to make the connection. Second, we don't want to use acid flux or acid core solder. We want to, because acid will eventually corrode the connection and provide for a poor electrical connection. So we'll use rosin for the flux, and for the solder, because it's not going into the water system, it's actually okay to use a lead-based solder, which melts at a lower temperature and flows easier. If you're going to use heat shrink tubing to insulate your finished product, make sure you add it over the wire before you start doing the solder job, unless it'll fit over the lug, in which case it's not an issue. But if you do, also make sure it's far enough away from your solder joint so it doesn't start shrinking before you get it in place where you want it. Here you can see I used a chisel and a hammer to actually cinch down on the wire and make a good mechanical bond. Okay, so now we're going to use the rosin flux. Make sure we get right down in there, so as it melts it'll go down into the joint. Normally we do this with a brush. I ran out of brushes, so we're just using a popsicle stick, which will get us going where we need to be. Okay, here we go. Okay, so now you just gently feed the heat shrink tubing over the connection and just heat it very gently. Doesn't take much heat, so once it shrinks, just leave it alone. So one thing that is wrong with this truck is the center post on the little vent popped loose, so it doesn't operate properly. You can see we're going to have to replace that. So to start, we'll have to take off the door handle and the window crank and the panel to get to the frame for the window and replace the whole item. 1967 and later Chevy's door handles and window cranks are held on by spring clips. But before that, as you can see in this photo, my 1965, the door handle and window crank is held on by a set screw. The set screw is an Allen head set screw, but it's awful hard to get an Allen wrench in to get at it. So what you need is a long driver with an Allen head bit. After removing the door handle and window crank, it's a simple matter of unscrewing some Phillips head screws to remove the door panel. For screws that have been in there for a while and may be a little difficult to remove, I really like using impact driver. The advantage of the impact driver is you use a little hammer on the end and it pushes the bit into the screw as it's turning, which of course prevents the bit from slipping out of the slot and stripping it. For these small screws, it only takes a light tap, but it works quite well. Once the door panel's off, a couple of bolts holding the frame for the vent will be obvious, and a few screws along the periphery on the outside, and out comes the old one, in goes the new.